The NBA playoffs have begun. While they do not contain the Indiana Pacers this year, that does not mean the Pacers and their fans do not have anything important to watch. What team styles are working, what strategies are working, what former Pacers are playing. We'll break it all down on what to watch for in the playoffs for a Pacers fan today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today we're diving into the NBA playoffs, but not necessarily just talking about the games, talking about what's going on. There'll be time for that later in the offseason. Today I'm going to talk about what Pacers, the team, and Pacers fans should be watching for in the playoffs, whether that's a strategy that's working for a specific team, whether that's a team building setup that's working for a specific team, whether that's an ex-Pacer still alive and playing in a specific game or for a specific team. And really, I'm going to dial it in to the Pacers, right? What can they carbon copy? A lot of times, these discussions are a little too opaque and not useful, right? The Pacers can't just go, oh, the Bucks won the title last year, let's copy that strategy, right? They have Giannis. Like, there are some tangible strategy and team building things that are noteworthy, and we'll talk about that later. But no, I don't want to go like that. I think it's more about how these teams are playing strategically and what about their roster makeup has allowed them to be really good, and can the Pacers kind of veer towards that strategy and plan to have some success. So this is always a fun one for me. I love diving into the playoffs. Right now, as I'm speaking to, the Heat lead the Hawks by 13 in the fourth quarter. The Grizzlies lead the Timberwolves by 6 in the second quarter. So some of the stuff I say could be updated by the time you listen in terms of scores. So the first thing to watch, zoomed out perspective, what team structures are working well? Because this is the worst record the Pacers have had besides 2 seasons in their franchise history. They are not quite a clean slate, right? Tyrese Halliburton's going to be on the Pacers next year. Chris Duarte is going to be on the Pacers next year unless these massive trades happen, which seems unlikely, right? They're not locked in to – they're not a completely clean slate, but they're pretty close, right? The Pacers could go a lot of different directions, as we talked about on yesterday's show with Pat Boylan, as Kevin Pritchard alluded to at the trade deadline, by calling the team a boat, right, that can head in any direction. They could go a lot of ways. So what team structures are successful? And today, at exit interviews for Cleveland, their head coach, I believe, JB Bickerstaff, kind of talked about how he was involved in the decision to have them be like a bigger team, right? They started Larry Markkinen at the 3, Evan Mobley at the 4, Jared Allen at the 5 for a lot of the season. That lineup extremely successful. Markkinen gelled in a more perimeter-based shooting-only role without less post touches. Jared Allen thrived having to defend 5s in an easier role and as a screen and roll maestro. Evan Mobley became this perfect glue complement piece as a big guy, and that worked, right? And they're not even in the playoffs, but that sort of stuff is stuff that the Pacers, I think, need to think about. And I've kind of classified these into groups, and a couple of them can make some sense for the Pacers as a team structure that they could pursue, and other ones would take a little longer to get there. And the first one is something that is a little more obtainable for a Pacers team that already has Tyrese Halliburton. A lot of good playoff teams this year, kind of maybe not their identity, but something that makes them really good or really hard to defend, or in general just a talented offensive team, is they have 2 elite ball handlers. And some teams that aren't in this category kind of can fall in this category. Feel free to move stuff around in your own head. But 2 elite ball handlers generally makes your offense so hard to defend, right? The Celtics with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. The Suns with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. The Warriors with Jordan Poole and Steph Curry. And really, Klay's not that threat anymore, but he's still talented. Draymond Green is an excellent ball handler. The Hawks with Bogdan Bogdanovic and Trae Young. The Bulls with Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, and the Nets, of course, with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Those teams really think, or really strategize about, okay, it's really hard for defenses to zone in on our one guy because we have someone else who can absolutely kill if the situation comes to that. The Warriors have been doing this for forever, right? If you zone in on Steph Curry, great. Draymond Green is now going to barrel down the lane and be an elite decision maker, and Klay Thompson's going to bury these threes as a secondary guy, right? The Suns, it's impossible to defend Chris Paul and Devin Booker perfectly because you have to focus on the other guy, and their offensive system is brilliant and ridiculous. So for the Pacers watching these teams, what kind of guy would make Tyrese Halliburton able to play like this? Because Halliburton's not quite at the level where defenses will just have to zone in on him with double teams and stuff, and he's a good enough passer to get out of a lot of that stuff. But so he needs to, I think Halliburton, especially the lead guys, Chris Paul, Trae Young, Kyrie, right? I think Halbert needs to watch a lot of those guys, dig into what they're doing really well that can allow him to be a lead alongside a second guy. But the Pacers need to figure out, what about these second guys? Booker could be a primary. All these guys really could be. But what are they doing well when they don't have the ball? Or what kind of skills can you find in a guy that would fit well with Halbert? And can Duarte develop some of these skills? Can someone else on the roster develop some of these skills? That seems less likely. But can Chris Duarte have the drives to the basket that you see from Devin Booker so often? Can he have the shot making of Kevin Durant every so often? He's not going to be those guys. He's not. There's no chance he gets as good as those guys. But can he implement enough of those skills to be that release valve from Halliburton to have a two-headed monster on offense? That is one team strategy that I think the Pacers would be smart to really study this postseason. How is it working, and how well do those teams even do? Right? A lot of those teams seem really strong to me. The Suns I would pick as a finals favorite. The Celtics obviously are very close. The Warriors are excellent. They're probably going to be in the conference finals, at least as things are trending now. The Nets are awesome, right? Those strategies, I think, are ones the Pacers need to really look at given their current team structure. This one is what the Pacers used to be in this group. They are so far from it now that it's going to be hard for them to take stuff from it. But the dominant defense group, the Heat, the Mavs, the Raptors, and the Grizzlies are who I have comprising this group at the moment. The Celtics, again, could be in this group. They had the best defense in the league this year. The Warriors had the second best defense. The Suns had the third, right? But those teams had the ball handler identity, to me, of something to look at for the Pacers' perspective. You can also put those teams in the defense group, but I just had to group every team. And for the Heat, Mavs, Raptors, and Grizzlies, I kind of think of them more as defensive teams, right? Heat finished fourth in defense this year. Grizzlies finished sixth. Mavs finished seventh. And the Raptors finished ninth. So what do those teams do well on defense? What do the Pacers need to copy from those teams to get back to being a good defensive team? Is it something they do schematically? Is it something they have a specific player that's able to do that the Pacers have no one that's able to do? And this was the Pacers group when they were in the playoffs, with Nate McMillan 3 years in a row. They were always top 10 defense, right? That was the thing that got them into the postseason. Even Bjorkgren had them at above average defense, right? That was the thing that they were in the postseason. They were in this group. Now, this group looks like the weakest in terms of results group. Like the Grizzlies already lost game one. The Raptors are down 0-2. Grizzlies currently limping through game two, really. The Mavs currently tied up, although Luka's been out, and the Heat are dominant, right? But can these defensive teams that are built this way, they don't necessarily have two dominant ball handlers. Although, again, the Celtics in this group, the Suns in this group, the Warriors in this group, but these teams that are more, their identity is on that dominant defense. What are they doing really well, and can the Pacers kind of learn from it? In the Raptors case, we'll talk about them in the next segment a lot. So many arms, just giant dudes everywhere, right? The Mavs schematically do not make a lot of mistakes. They overload the strong side. The Heat have a lot of good switchable bodies. They don't make a lot of mistakes either. The Grizzlies, also very well disciplined, right? What can the Pacers learn from that? How can they study anything from those defenses to go from 28th to not 28th to 20th to 15th? That is another team strategy to watch. The dominant big man strategy was something the Pacers could have thought about in the past. Not so much anymore now that Sabonis is in Sacramento. I just put Denver and Philly in this group, although, again, you could call Joel Embiid a ball handler. I would not blink twice. And the Nuggets obviously are in a weird spot because they built their team around three stars. They only have one of them in Nikola Jokic. But, Joel Embiid also drawing doubles, drawing a lot of defensive attention. How do those teams play through the post if the Pacers do end up with a dominant post player somehow this offseason, whether that's the draft, whether they add one, whether Miles Turner suddenly becomes a magnificent passer? Again, unlikely, but covering all the bases. How do those teams look? Is that something that would work really well with Halliburton, right? James Harden certainly has played very well off of Joel Embiid, is able to have less opportunity, but is able to still get to the basket very well. It's harder for defenses to overload on him, right? In Denver, Jamal Murray was doing that very well, especially in the postseason before his ACL injury, right? Is that something the Pacers can learn from? And then the Bucks and Jazz, I just put elite offensive system teams. You could call them a lot of things, especially Milwaukee. They have Chris Middleton, who's a star. Drew Holiday's a star. Brook Lopez is a defensive machine, right? They've really got a lot in Milwaukee, but they only finished 14th in defense this year. Their offense was definitely better, third in the league in offense this year. The Jazz were first in the league in offense by a lot, by almost a full point over Golden State. Those teams are really systematically strong offensively. They get the right shots, and a lot of that is playing through stars in the case of the Bucks especially. But they also are really smart about how they play, how they generate the shots, who they put in the right lineups, right? Can the Pacers learn from that? And I think in both of those teams' cases, the Jazz aren't perfect in this way. But they have a lot of shooters all the time on the floor, right? The Pacers, I think, from the playoffs, something they will learn and something that will come up in the next segment is getting more shooters is imperative, right? A lot of these teams that are in the offensive category and in the elite two ball handlers category have awesome shooters. The last two teams here, I didn't really know what bucket to put them in. I just typed the team names down. And that is the Minnesota Timberwolves and the New Orleans Pelicans. Look, full credit to the Pelicans. They made it this far. They also made it this far with a plus 0.2 net rating and the 19th best offense and the 18th best, a minus 0.8 net rating. That's a 111, not a 112. The 19th best offense and the 18th best defense. They got a lot of good internal improvement. They have some decent fitting pieces. They were a lot better after starting 1-12, but nothing about their identity seems like something another team should want to replicate. You know what I mean? They have good pieces in place to be really good. If Zion suits up for them next year, perhaps they want to copy some Valanciunas tape on how to handle the ball on the inside, for example, or maybe some Brandon Ingram film on footwork and technique in the mid range and mid post, but not a lot there. In Minnesota, look, I don't know what to make of Minnesota. They're clearly very good. They're very, very well coached by Chris Finch, and they're the 13th in defense during the regular season. Their offense got up to 7th. Right, they're clearly a threatening team. They won in Memphis in Game 1. They could do some damage in this playoff. I don't really know how to categorize them. Right, D'Angelo Russell is just a good player. Anthony Edwards is a special playoff performer. Maybe that counts as two talented ball handlers. Karl Anthony Towns is the best post scorer in the league right now, one of the best post shooters ever. Right, their defensive scheme makes a lot of sense despite not having plus defenders everywhere, but they do have good plus defenders in guys like Jared Vanderbilt and Patrick Beverly. How do they get this all to work together is a lot of schematic stuff, right? Chris Finch is a really, really excellent coach. There's a reason he got extended basically 1 year after getting hired. So I didn't know where to put them in the Pelicans. The Pelicans are not a team I think the Pacers should spend a ton of time on, or fans in general, of, hey, look, that was good. The Pacers should do that. But the Timberwolves are definitely one I think does merit a lot of discussion and time. They're hanging tough in Game 2 right now in Memphis. They won the first game. They've got a lot of stuff that works. They've got a lot of players. They play hard and together. This isn't quite fair, but they kind of give me a vibe of the 2017-18 Pacers just in how they play and the level of success they're able to have. So what is working for them, it could be something worth copying, but it's not necessarily clear what like the elite thing they do is, or what the identity thing they have is beyond just being a really, really solid team at everything they do. That is replicatable. So from a strategy standpoint, I think the teams the Pacers need to watch the most are those teams that have two elite ball handlers. What are they doing so well offensively? Can that be replicated for the Pacers if they get another one of those guys alongside Tyrese Halliburton? But the dominant defensive teams and the teams with really special offensive systems, what are they doing really well to generate open shots? What are their priorities throughout the game? Those are the strategic and structural things I think the Pacers, those are the structural things I think the Pacers and their fans need to be watching out for in the playoffs. Let's go to strategies, specific things that are unique to certain teams in this postseason that I will be curious how they work in a playoff setting, first of all, and two, if they're replicatable by another franchise, such as the Indiana Pacers. Before we do that, though, I want to talk about the good folks over at Shady Rays, an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays, exclusively for our listeners. Head to ShadyRays.com. Use the code LOCKEDON when you're checking out to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal this season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. ShadyRays.com. Code LOCKEDON. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Now, hear from our local experts in Atlanta, Miami, Memphis, Minnesota, to hear about what happened in the Game 2s around the NBA, plus the latest and greatest news around the league with the playoffs in full swing. God, it's the best time of the year. In the NBA, let's trudge on. Let's go from structural things, right, how the teams are built and how that allows them to be successful, to some strategies that I think are very interesting and stuff that I would love for the Pacers to think about, or at least sort of implement. And a lot of this is just like kind of stuff that I think is unique about certain teams, but I kind of picked and choose things that I think are important for the Pacers to potentially consider. And the first one of these is I just wrote Memphis, and that is not helpful for you, the listener, but I will explain. Memphis Grizzlies are really good, 2 seed in the West for a reason. Great players everywhere. Every single guy in that team has like some ability they have that they are above average at or elite at in some way. Jaren Jackson's defense, Desmond Bane's shooting, John Morant's unbelievable. Steven Adams is a top 5 screener in the league. Their whole team has something they can latch onto to stay on the floor and be really helpful. But Memphis is a fascinating team. And I've talked about this a lot with them on the show before when the Pacers played them, and in general when just eulogizing on the Memphis Grizzlies. The way the NBA is talked about a lot these days is points per possession. How are you maximizing your points per possession over the course of the game? Are you taking more efficient shots? Are you taking better shots? Are you playing better defense and forcing the other team to shoot from poor areas, right? What are you doing to maximize your points per possession minus the other team's points per possession? The Grizzlies' strategy isn't to make the top half of the fraction higher, it's to make the bottom half of the fraction higher. They said, hey, we're going to make our possessions huge so that our points are guaranteed to be high. If we have more possessions than the other team, even if our efficiency isn't awesome, we can still win every game. And I think that is a fascinating strategy. A lot of the efficiency wave that has come over the last 5 years has ignored the possession part of the game. So let's just zoom out, talk about this as a thing, right? The Grizzlies this season finished 19th in shooting percentage. They were 17th in three-point percentage, 23rd in two-point percentage, 28th in free throw percentage. So below average shooting from just very generic zones in the league. And yet they made the second most shots in the league per game at 43.5 and the seventh most free throws at 23.1 because of the following stats. 1, first in the league in offensive rebounds, 14.1. 2, first in the league in total rebounds. They scoop up those defensive ones as well, 8th on that end of the floor. They were first in steals at almost 10 a game. First in blocks, deterring shots. 9th in turnovers, they never turn it over. So you put that all together, and what happens is Memphis has the ball all the time. If they miss, Steven Adams is grabbing it. Jaren Jackson's grabbing it. Whoever they have in the game is capable on the offensive glass. They're very good at blending. Some guys getting back for transition, some guys crashing the offensive glass. They're very good at getting out in transition when they get those rebounds. They get a lot of stops or blocks in a way that allow them to control the possession. They never turn it over. They force the other team to turn it over. All of a sudden, the game ends. And this might seem minor, but they've taken maybe 7 or 8 more shots in their team. Per game, they shot 94.4 times per game. Their opponent shot 88.6 times per game. That's basically 6 shots a game difference. That is a fascinating strategy. That's not a very common thing you see, is the possession game dominated to that sort of extent, right? They gave up a below average number of shots per game, and they were first in shots taken. That is a fascinating strategy, and one I would like to see more teams with different sorts of makeups kind of execute is, maybe we aren't going to out-efficiency you, but we're going to take 6 more shots and just hope that those 6 shots can be efficient enough to make up the difference in terms of the average shot quality we are taking every game. The Grizzlies gave up a top 10 field goal percentage in the league this season, but because bottom 10, their defense is solid. But because they were just so far ahead in that possession game, they were able to win a lot of games. And I think that's a fascinating strategy, and I want to see how it works in the playoffs. And if it does work well, even just winning one round for a young Memphis team, I'd call that a success. I would love to see the Pacers think about implementing something like this, right? Can they get better on the offensive glass? Can they really clean up the turnovers? That was something the Pacers were really terrible at this season, turnovers and timely turnovers. Can they be a better steals team? They have a lot of good game readers. Can they apply that to defense? I think if they can combine those things with better transition defense, they could actually do something like this. And that could be one of their ways of improving drastically. If that strategy works in the postseason, I think more teams will latch onto what Memphis is doing. Here's another thing that happened. This isn't like a new trend, right? All stars and stars can ISO. They don't have to pass as much to be successful. Their teams don't have to. But the Jazz in particular kind of normalized lower passing from teams. And ball movement is good. I don't want to say lower passing equals great. But let me just take you around the league for a little bit to talk about low passing numbers and style in general teams. The team that threw the fewest passes per game this season was the Milwaukee Bucks, the 3 seed in the East. The second fewest passes in the regular season was the Hawks, who were 8th in the East. The third fewest passes per game this season was the Suns, 1st in the West. The fourth fewest passes per game was the Jazz, who were 5th in the West. The Nets are next, the Bulls are next, the Grizzlies are next, the Clippers are next. A lot of the bottom half of the league teams in passes per game are good teams. And again, some of that is because they have ISO masters who don't need to pass as much to be successful. But some of that is when you pass fewer times, just by default, hey, you're going to turn the ball over less often and have those live ball turnovers that are really killer for a basketball team. And a lot of those teams still finished high in the assist ranks. They just were smart about when they passed. The Suns finished 4th in assists per game despite having the 4th fewest passes per game. They're very productive passers. So I'll be curious. Look, again, some of that is just the power of stars, and Halliburton growing will help in this area in terms of, him just being able to put his head down and get to the basket. But does this strategy of not whipping the ball around unnecessarily, not throwing it ahead when you don't necessarily need to, when your elite guys already got the ball, right? Finding the right balance of passes, and does this lower passing style lead to success? Because Halliburton, brilliant passer, brilliant in transition, probably going to break the Pacers per game franchise assist record next season. That's not to say passing is bad. Chris Paul is an insanely good passer for a team that doesn't pass that much, right? But it's the right passes. It's passing at the right time and taking the right shots. And Halliburton has tried to grow in that area, and other Pacers will have to grow in that area as well. But finding that balance correctly for every player, and maybe it is taking the shot more often than teams do because it's easier to get a stop in transition after a miss than it is after a live ball turnover. Figuring out that balance I think is crucial for the Pacers, and watching teams that employ that strategy will be fascinating. The third thing I wrote is the long arms defense strategy. That's a very lame way of putting it, but the Raptors, despite not being necessarily the most talented team in the NBA, finished ninth in defensive rating. The Bucks always have a quality defense, and those two teams in particular do this. But also the Celtics, because Marcus Smart's large for a guard, and Al Horford's pretty mobile. And the Warriors have a lot of switch size guys, and the Heat kind of do this as well, right? They just throw giant people on the floor. And the reason they're able to do this is somewhat because these guys are good at defense, but also because they can do a little bit on offense. But the long arms overwhelm the strong side strategy, I think, is kind of growing as a defensive plan. Nick Nurse has been all over this. Nate Bjorkgren tried it a little bit with the Pacers. Their personnel wasn't great for it. They didn't have a lot of wings last year. But do those defensive styles have some success? Look, Toronto might be toast. Scotty Barnes already got hurt. Fred VanVleet's banged up. They are already down 0-2. They might not win. Milwaukee, though, is the team to watch here, and the Heat as well. Can these just giant swarm you wing teams do well? And if they do, if you're the Pacers, look, this has been a Pacers thing for years, since Vic was a star. They just can't get the wings. They have not had big wings. Thad was kind of a big wing, although they put him inside a little more. He couldn't shoot well enough to be a wing. TJ Warren is great. He never played. If he's back for the Pacers, then he's one of these guys. Cruz Duarte is not quite the size you think of here at 6'5". Maybe he can be if he gets a little bulkier. Right? They just never had the wings. So, can Isaiah Jackson kind of be Precious Achua or Chris Boucher or Scotty Barnes, where he's more mobile and perimeter deployed? Right? Can they get more of these guys? That seems like a trend in the NBA that's definitely sticking and going to stick, is these wing-sized guys, not only stopping them, but having them and able to deploy them, because size is just an advantage. If you're able to do the same things as someone else, but you're taller, you're just going to be better. So figuring out, what is working for those teams in terms of their defense and their size, and are they switching, and how does their long arms and being in the gaps make them so successful, and can the Pacers implement that? Can they get the guys who can help them implement that? This one is, I think, the most Pacer-specific strategy I want to talk about. Do these teams that rely on a lot of transition, can they make a playoff run? Can they be a really good playoff team? Because something Rick Carlisle talked about with Halliburton is he's a brilliant transition player, and he is. And, for a lot of the season, the Pacers' plan in transition was, hey, I trust a lot of you guys to bring the ball up. Rick Carlisle will talk about that. Sabonis, great. Brogdon, great. LeVert, great. Whoever, just take it up, set up. At the end of the season, he was like, F that. I want Tyrese Halliburton to have the ball in transition, right? So the Pacers' transition strategy will change a little bit. But do these teams, the Pacers look like a team that at least would like to be, in a very, very strong transition team. Let's talk about Memphis again, right? Their strategy was a lot of steals. They led the league in transition frequency. Can they be a team that relies on transition in the playoffs? The Bucks were a high transition frequency team. The Raptors, the Timberwolves. Can those teams do well in the playoffs? Can that sort of style, where you're forcing teams to make live ball errors and you are now running in transition, can that be successful? Because, the Milwaukee's likely to still have a very successful playoffs, but the other teams there, Minnesota, Toronto, and Memphis, who, were looking like regular season darlings to some extent, can they make a run? Like, one of Minnesota or Memphis is going to beat each other. But in the second round, can that team do anything to Golden State with that sort of strategy? Or I guess if Golden State loses to Denver, but I mean, come on. So can that be something that is successful on the biggest stage? And that's not, the Bucks might do it. They might just outrun everybody again. They won the title last year. But can it be done in a way that the Pacers, who have Halliburton and love to run now, can say, hey, wow, we can do that, or we need to put a little more emphasis on the steal game next year? And that might tie in with that strong side, long arm sort of defensive style. And the last thing here is, where do the best defensive teams thrive? We talked about those strong defensive teams: Heat, Mavs, Raptors, Grizzlies, who are known for their defense, but also Celtics, Suns, Warriors, excellent defensive teams. Even the Bulls are a good defensive team, although without Lonzo, it's certainly worse. How are they thriving on defense? Because you think of the Jazz defense a lot as one of the best defensive teams, because they have been for a while. They weren't this year, but they have Rudy Gobert, who might be the best defensive player on planet Earth. They also, if you've been watching Mavs Jazz at all, have like the worst point of attack defense ever. Conley and Mitchell combined is just a brutal combo for point of attack defense. So Gobert can only do so much. And then all of a sudden there's breakdowns elsewhere, and boom, Gobert's covering two guys at the basket and the Mavs score. How are the elite teams, not Utah anymore, how are the elite teams succeeding on defense? How is their point of attack defense thriving? Because the Pacers were terrible at this. So whatever team, it can be any team. A lot of teams are better at point of attack defense this year. Just latch onto any of those if you're the Pacers or a fan of the team and say, what are they doing so well beyond their personnel? Right? Obviously, the Pacers need better players, right, for the defensive end of the floor. But what are they doing well stylistically? A help, maybe it's a help thing. Maybe it's an angle of their hips thing. Maybe it's just a number of things. What are they doing well that the Pacers can copy and say, Chris Duarte, watch this guy, something like that. Hey, Dwayne Washington, watch this guy. Those sort of things I think will be a big thing strategically. So a lot of schematic stuff and structural stuff about teams and a lot of strategic stuff about teams I think will be key for the Pacers to watch. Now let's get a little more not so much into the weeds about these teams and talk about ex-Pacers who are still playing. I think I got them all. And how they're doing, how they look outside the Pacers ecosystem, how they can do in the playoffs. Because this is always something fun for me to watch, is guys I've covered or talked to a lot and know their kind of their goals or their life path a little bit, seeing how they do in the postseason. I know a lot of fans care about that stuff as well. Let's talk about that. But before we do that, I want to talk about the great folks over at Built Bar who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. They're 100% covered in chocolate, soft, easy to chew protein bars that come in so many flavors that there's something for everybody, right? So the problem I have with protein bars that I've tried before, they're like rubbery or bendy or plasticky. They're just not the right texture. Some of them taste okay. Most of them don't, though. Built Bar, which I've tried over a dozen flavors of, tastes like a candy bar. Comes in a flavor for everybody. There's like fruit varieties. There's peanut butter brownies, my favorite. There's mint ones. There's puff ones with like a marshmallow infusion. And because they're 100% covered in real chocolate and they kind of have a texture that matches their taste, they're all absolutely delicious. And not only that, they got to be a protein bar. It's healthy, low calorie, high protein. Get rid of candy bars. Go Built Bar instead, right? You can see all the macros for your favorite flavors right on the website, but most of them have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Try them yourself. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you check out. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Check out Locked On NBA for the latest and greatest around the league from John Corrales and Jake Madison as they dissect the playoffs and the upcoming games of Wednesday. The Pacers have a lot of ex-Pacers in the playoffs this year. And the interesting thing, this will be a shorter segment, but the interesting thing about the ex-Pacers in the playoffs this year, there's two guys who are on the Pacers this season, who are in their team's playoff rotations, could be making some noise this postseason. Torrey Craig with the Suns, there's a chance Torrey Craig, who played for both title teams last year, has a shot to once again reach the finals, this time with the other team, or with the Suns again, this time potentially with the championship team. Excuse me, the Suns look very good. It's been fun to see Torrey Craig do well for them. His role is so much easier with them than with the Pacers. He was taking a lot of off the dribble shots and catch and shoot threes with the Pacers and still defending the best player. With the Suns, he played 11 minutes in game one. He took one shot, was a +3 because his defense was good. He had 2 steals, right? That's all he's asked to do, right? That all the guys who are on the Pacers this year were a little overtaxed at times, and they have much easier roles with their other teams. So Torrey Craig was on the Pacers this year. I'll be fascinated to see if he can continue that going forward. And then Tristan Thompson is the other former Pacer playing in the playoffs this year. Obviously a little bit hazy there because he only played 4 games for the Pacers, but he's still alive playing in the postseason for the Bulls. He's not playing well for the Bulls necessarily. Played 7 minutes in game 1, 2 points, 2 rebounds, but we'll see if he can make any noise. And it's hard to compare his role with the Pacers to that of another team. He was playing a lot kind of because they needed him to. They had no bigs at that time, and they needed him to suit up. So we'll see if Tristan Thompson can have any sort of lasting impact on this postseason. Some other ex-Pacers that I would like to note out. There's one first-round matchup going on between two right now. Thad Young, who's a little injured for the Toronto Raptors, and Georges Niang for the Philadelphia 76ers. One of them is going to move on. Been fascinating to see them both develop. Thad into a defensive specialist with a little more passing chops. He really grew his game with Chicago. Unfortunately, had to be dealt in the sign and trade to the Spurs, and then the Spurs sent him to the Raptors in the Dragic deal. And in general, he went from the Pacers to playoff team, and then traded to a different playoff team, and then traded to a different playoff team. He always has value everywhere he goes, and I'm hopeful that the Raptors are able to find something because they have a very fascinating team this year. And then Niang has just really remastered his game since the Pacers did not bring him back for his second year. He can really, really shoot it now. Is quite the specialist for that Philadelphia team. And then the winner of that series, right, one of Toronto or Philly is going to win, will play the Hawks or Heat in the second round. And in that round, they will either be playing Nate McMillan and his Atlanta Hawks, who, despite a spirited comeback just now, are going to lose to Miami in game 2 and be down 0-2, or they're going to be playing against Victor Oladipo, finally healthy enough to play in the postseason for the Miami Heat. Not playing a lot, but certainly on the team and able to play if they need him. He's currently not played for them in game 2 against the Hawks. He's kind of out of that rotation. Gabe Vincent has been very good for the Heat this year. Duncan Robinson, obviously. They have a lot of guys who play their guard minutes. Max Strus played 22 minutes for them tonight. They have a lot of guys in their guard rotation who are good. They don't need Vic, but I hope he's able to play at least at some point in this run for them. He has really been longing for some playoff success. So there will be guaranteed one ex-Pacer if it's McMillan as a coach or if it's Thad Niang or Vic as a player in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then George Hill and Wes Matthews are both on Milwaukee, so they both have a very good shot as well to reach deep into that. There's no one on the Nets or the Celtics, unfortunately. So no, not unless you count Brad Stevens, which you shouldn't. There's not necessarily a lock for an Eastern the Finals to have an East player who's an ex-Pacer, but there are a lot of fun battles over there. But Vic, yeah, his career obviously took a drastic turn after he got injured, and it's hard to compare his game with the Pacers to a different team. So I'm not gonna, like I did with Niang and Thad, say anything about him. And McMillan has certainly become more of a player's coach with Atlanta. As a younger team, he kind of had to, and he's done a good job with that group. If you saw the locker room footage after the Hawks beat the Cavs, I know most Pacers fans want to forget that game, but from the playing game, he was very uppy and excited for his team in the locker room. I think he's gotten a lot better at that kind of stuff. Out west, not as many. There's only two that are really noteworthy to me. One, this one doesn't count really. Devon Reed, if you remember him, two-way player for the Pacers in 2018-19, is playing for Denver, but he's on a two-way, which means he's not eligible to play in the playoffs. But he is currently on a team playing in the postseason. And there's two that are a little more serious. Bojan Bogdanovic for the Jazz. He was the star for them in game 1 in terms of scoring and being a solid offensive player. He continues to just, he got out of Indiana. He wasn't on the McMillan team anymore. Quinn Snyder said, yeah, shoot 4 more threes a game. And all of a sudden he was a 20 points a game scorer and was a valuable playoff player, right? He's currently through 2 games with the Jazz, averaging 25.5 points per game in the postseason for them. And he won't keep that up necessarily, but that's on 30% shooting from deep, right? If he stabilizes a bit from 3 and 2, he might be able to be a very reliable threat for the Jazz this season. If he can be, that'd be huge. His game has definitely grown throughout his career. And that actually started with the Pacers, right? They did a good job of finding something with him. And the other guy out west that I want to talk about is Aaron Holiday. Aaron Holiday on the Suns now, if you recall, after being traded to the Wizards. In the Isaiah Jackson trade, and then traded just for cash straight to the Suns. But now he's on the Suns. He did not play in game 1. He is their third point guard behind Campaign and Chris Paul, but there's always a chance the Suns, they're a machine. They blow somebody out. He gets some minutes. I'm hopeful to see him have a nice long run into the postseason. And learning from Chris Paul can certainly only be good for him because, his career has certainly been a little bit of inefficient scoring and not quite the passer he was pegged to be coming out of school. It looked like he grew his passing his second year, and that never really maintained. But he's certainly shown in Phoenix he can be a reliable shooter and at least a quality enough ball handler that he might get on the floor for a few games, and I hope all the best for him. He was a fun guy to cover, and it'll be cool to see his career develop. So that's all the ex-Pacers in the playoffs if you want to tune into any of those guys. But between the Suns and the Jazz out west and then the multitude of guys in the East, if the Bucks make the conference finals, there is guaranteed an ex-Pacer at least in the finals. And if the Suns make it as well, there's a good shot an ex-Pacer is going to hoist the trophy this season. So always fun to watch all this stuff in the playoffs. Hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and are enjoying the NBA playoffs. Unfortunately, I don't really have an outlet to cover these games or anything, but I'll be happy to talk about some of them in any future episodes. But we'll be definitely getting more offseason-y and drafty and free agency very soon, I promise. I want to cover all the actual basketball aspects of this past season and a little bit of them this offseason. And we did a little bit in the mailbag last week if you're looking for some trade and draft talk. Later this week, we'll be doing 2 episodes. 1, I'm going to have a guest on, TBD who it is, to talk about Rick Carlisle's first season with the Pacers, kind of evaluate how he did as a coach. And 2, I did kind of the exit interviews recap last week as the Pacers players all talked. But an episode I do every year is I put the players' audio from that directly into the show so you can hear what they said about their upcoming free agency, and I'll kind of react to it and explain what they said and what it means. So stay tuned for those shows this week. They're always very cool and exciting. And next week, I've got some actual guests lined up to do draft talk about some of the better prospects. Should be awesome. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Hope you had a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.